Well, Stormy and I want to welcome you back to GLBC Connections, and I got to tell you, I'm feeling a little bit ripped off. Today, Andrew was supposed to be talking about 1 Corinthians 6 in his video. I'm recording this on Thursday of last week, and it turned out that Andrew did not do that. Andrew jumped ahead to 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and I didn't realize that. I was all ready to do this video and found out when Brian first watched it this morning that Andrew had done the wrong one. So, what is a good pastor to do in this situation? Well, we live in a pretty litigious society. How about if I just sue Andrew? I'll sue him for doing the wrong chapter and see if I can make him redo it and get it right. Obviously, that solution is ridiculous and silly because it's not that important of a thing, is it? I can just, as I'm doing now, going back and talking about chapter 6, and my beef with Andrew is lighthearted and not really a big deal at all. But Paul says that very same thing about a lot of disputes. In fact, we see in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, he says, if any of you has a dispute with another, there he take it before the ungodly for judgment instead of before the saints. Do you not know that the saints will judge the world? And if you were to judge the world, are you not competent to judge trivial cases? What does Paul mean by trivial cases? Well, certainly he means Andrew doing the wrong chapter is a trivial case. But look at it from the entire context here. Paul is saying that all of their disputes are trivial in light of the eternal kingdom. Paul says, what you guys are going to be judging the world. There are kingdom things at stake, and you're messing around, suing each other before the courts for things that aren't that important. Now, that doesn't mean they're not important to the person that's involved, right? I mean, they could be big and serious things by normal standards. It could be a lot of money. It could be a big deal, a big contract being broken. Paul is really saying, in light of kingdom things, in light of the fact that we are, as believers, eventually going to judge all people, Paul says they're all trivial. Nothing's important other than the kingdom. And so he says, why would you take it before the courts? He continues on with that, and he says, verse 4, therefore, if you have disputes about such matters, that is, whatever they are, any disputes, appoint as judges even men of little account in the church. So if I'm really upset with Andrew, what should I do? I should go appoint a judge, and it could be anybody, even somebody of little account. So I think I'll call Brian here in a little bit and see if he'll judge this dispute for me. Since it turns out, Paul says, anybody's capable and qualified, even Pastor Brian. He can judge between Andrew and I as we've mixed up these two chapters. Why does Paul say that? Paul says that the least important person who is a believer in Jesus Christ will someday participate in the judgment of the entire world, and thus, with that wisdom in mind, Paul says anybody is more qualified to judge in the church than to bring it before unbelievers outside the church. Not only that, Paul says, but those disputes, they hurt our witness. He says, instead, one brother goes to law against another, and this in front of unbelievers. That's verse 6. So Paul says, look what you're doing. You're bringing your disputes to people who don't know Jesus Christ, and you're basically saying we can't get along. And for Paul, love between the believers is a core component, maybe the core component of a theology of the church, the ability to love one another. Paul says, why would you take that before unbelievers and show them that we do not live up to those standards? So he says, show love, bring it to another believer. Paul then continues the reasoning for this, or not really the reasoning, but I think maybe this is the heart of the passage, and I think it applies more than just to lawsuits. And this is very important. I do think it applies to more than lawsuits. And here I want to talk directly to the evangelical world around me. Verse 7, he says, the very fact that you have lawsuits among you means you have been completely defeated already. Why not rather be wronged? Why not rather be cheated? Instead, you yourselves cheat and do wrong, and you do this to your brothers. Notice Paul's point. Paul says, why, if you are wronged, why risk the kingdom message? Why risk the gospel message? Paul says, so much the better that we should simply be wronged, that we should simply be cheated. Man, that is the opposite of what our rights-obsessed culture tells us. They tell us you have to stand up for your rights. We have women's rights, and we also have men's rights, and civil rights, and all kinds of rights, and legal rights. And many of those rights are very important, and we're thankful for them. But Paul says your rights, even to money and even to being wronged, they're not more important than the gospel. Why not rather be wronged? I've told Patty before at moments when I've been cheated or have felt like maybe I was. Sometimes you just let the Lord do his work. We never want to sacrifice the message of the gospel just to get our way or just to get what we think is due us. In the end, Paul says that's true because of who we are. He says at the end of this passage, but you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and by the Spirit of our God. Why is that so important? We have to understand who we are before Jesus Christ. And who we are a people who have been given a great gift of salvation, something we were not owed. Jesus was deeply wronged on the cross, and yet he still loved us. Jesus he had his rights violated in his suffering and death, and yet he did that for us. If he can do all that, how much more can we give up a little bit of money, a little bit of a few of our rights, just a little bit, just so that the gospel can go forth? Sometimes being cheated and being wronged is less important than the gospel itself. In fact, Paul says this by the time we get to the end of this. Being cheated and being wronged is always less important than the gospel witness between believers. So, the next time you feel wronged by a fellow believer, remember these words, remember these verses. In order to make it right, we do that within the church and not without. It's not because we want to hide our garbage, not because we want to hide our sin, but because we want to learn to love each other, and that's the message of the gospel. Thanks for joining us today. Next week, or I should say on Thursday, Scott Catterett, our intern, will be back with us talking about 1 Corinthians chapter 8. So we'll be back on track, and Andrew can rest easy as long as he gets it right next time so that I don't have to file a lawsuit. See ya.